Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and as always, I'm joined by Julian Darius. Julian, how are you doing? You okay?
I'm doing fine, but I learned a lot from this episode, Mazey Day. I've been following celebrities for fun. I had no idea you get paid for it.
That's right. We're jumping into Mazey Day to talk paps or paparazzi. Yeah, it's an interesting episode. I wanted to say, we're going to be watching another episode of Black Mirror, but this is very much in the realm of Tales from the Crypt, really. Yeah, let's do a quick burst of it. So, Mazey Day, the fourth episode in season 6. We're getting right close to the end now, ladies and gentlemen. We've almost done a full run. A troubled starlet is dogged by invasive paparazzi while dealing with the consequences of a hit-and-run incident. That's half of it. The other half is we follow a paparazzi as she may or may not question the ethics of what it is she does while she chases down the great shot of this troubled starlet that could actually sort of pay her way. This has got the main sort of star of this is Zazie Beetz, who I've liked and a lot of other things. I think she's very good in other things. Not so sure about this one, but yeah, what are your initial thoughts then on Mazey Day?
I think this is probably one of the weakest episodes of the show. It's the first outright supernatural episode, so we really should not be covering it, except that it is a Black Mirror episode. It reminds me of episodes of the Twilight Zone that we've covered where it's really a supernatural episode, but it's a show that's sci-fi, so we'll follow it through. I don't love that, and I don't love the paparazzi sort of narrative. Like, it seems to me it really doesn't. I mean, it's an adequate episode. I don't hate it, but it really felt to me, you mentioned like Tales from the Crypt. It reminds me of, I'm a fan of American Horror Story.
Yes.
I've seen all the seasons, and I've seen American Horror Stories, the 2 seasons out thus far. That's their sort of
anthology
show.
Yeah.
Where every episode is a different story. This feels very much like an American Horror Stories episode to me. Perfectly adequate, don't hate it, but just don't love it, and it doesn't feel special in that Black Mirror way that I want it to.
Yeah, I think I agree. It's like you say, it's not so much one of the things, there's a whole thing around like Black Mirror is about this tech. It's the use of tech and all this other stuff. It's the misuse of tech or the comeuppance from the misuse of tech and stuff. And this really doesn't have anything other than cameras, and it doesn't even utilize this idea of the camera and this idea of how things are perceived, and maybe the camera sort of does something different. There's no even acknowledgement of the cameras other than he's a paparazzi, and we're going to deal with a werewolf at the end. It's not even the tech stuff. Even the tone and the approach to this feels wholly different than what we've had previously. It just, I don't know. It didn't feel, like you said, like a Black Mirror episode, and not even the technology or sci-fi element, just the tone or the approach. It was, it's odd. It was an odd thing. It's sort of like there's a lack of cynicism, but it's there. But it's almost like there's a shallow surface cynicism to this episode.
Well, I think that comes out in its dealing with the paparazzi angle. That it's sort of like, yeah, I mean, but the thing is, that's been done to death, right?
Yeah.
Um, I mean, there was that whole series on FX, Dirt, that
Yeah.
was sort of
Yeah.
about paparazzi. And
Nightcrawler.
yeah, and you can certainly still do those stories, but the question is sort of like, what do you have to say about it and our celebrity obsessed culture that is new, right?
Mm.
That we haven't seen before. And I don't know that this has anything to say. It's just, oh, it's a dirty job, and it's a way people make money. Um, Having the first person she photographs commit suicide kind of makes it seem as if it's really going to wrestle with that, but then it really doesn't. It just turns into a horror story. So,
Yeah, that's why. I mean, this is one of the shorter episodes I should highlight as well. I
mhm,
mean, we've been dealing with long episodes. This is 43 minutes, so it's not even that long. This is why I was kind of like frustrated with this episode. It's like it keeps doing things and saying things, and then it sort of like almost like just wanders off to the next point, and you're like, well, sorry, we haven't addressed the last thing. Can we get back to it? Everything in this is sort of like I there was a thing done about it was the guys who made South Park, but they made a really good point about everything should in a story should be because of the last thing. They did this because of this, and then because of that they did
mhm,
this. Like your bad storytelling is like, and then this happens, and then this
right.
happens. This episode very much feels like, and then this happens, and then this happens. Like,
Hmm.
it keeps happening. The first section, I'd say that there's sort of three parts to this episode, three acts, as you say. The first act, I was quietly confident that this was going to be something I'd like. I thought, oh, this could be interesting. They're going to deal with something interesting. I sort of, as I've been going in blind to a lot of these, but as we've noticed, I think I'm sort of opposite to the general consensus. So I'm sort of going, oh, this is one of the lowest scored ones. I'm probably going to love it. So when she sort of
Hmm.
collars that guy coming out the hotel room, and she's selling the figures, they're selling the photos, and the guy actually offered her more not to release them, and then the guys, then she sort of like, so that her newsy person TMZ or whatever it is sort of like ends up matching him and going, all right, well, I'll give you 300 a shot or whatever, and then sort of like it moves on, and then he commits suicide. I was like, okay, this is going to be interesting now. This is going to be this whole thing of like, there's going to be something in the way she uses the camera, or sort of like you say, it's going to interrogate this thing of the use of technology to be invasive, and maybe we're going to go into like cameras in homes, or like the use of our privacy through technology, like we've said before, like your phone or Alexa or all this other stuff.
Hmm.
So I was like, oh, we're going to get into something like that. And so, no, she just sort of quits that job and goes and works at a coffee shop. And that's it. And I was just like, oh, okay. She sort of wrestled with it for all of 10 minutes and then moved on. And I was like, even then, I was like, oh, maybe I'll go back to that. Maybe it's going to go back to this thing. Maybe it's got something to say, as you say, about, the difference between being a paparazzi and selling your own photos of yourself, say, like, OnlyFans or something like that. So
Hmm.
I was still expecting some twist, and then like you just find out that this has been this hit and run, and this actress, it's it's just so sort of like, and then this happens, and then this happens. Like it just seems so linear that I was just like, I was really confused. I was almost confused. I was overthinking this episode continually.
Mm. Yeah, and I don't think there's any aspect of this episode that I really truly hate.
Mm-mm.
Um, I take it that the men who sort of intervene and assist in this paparazzi, episode of invading this compound, are more aggressive than the main character
Yeah,
is. Okay, but that's not much of a point. They're sort of all depicted as they're just a little more scummy and embracing being more scummy than she is. And I sort of feel like this is neither a good paparazzi episode or a good werewolf episode.
no,
Um, I sort of feel like it doesn't have a lot to say about the paparazzi phenomenon, but it also doesn't really get at anything new except, well, what if a celebrity became a werewolf?
yeah,
Who gives a shit, right? Like there's a kind of like
but this has
it,
been
it's
done. This has
Right.
been done. Like, if you go back and watch The Howling, that's literally what The Howling's about. And it's about a compound that the people go off to, and it's a news reporter. And it's like, I was like, wow, this is going to go, like this is basically cribbing on Dirt or Nightcrawler and The Howling. And all of those are better than this.
Yes. Yeah, very much so. That's a very good point. And there's a weird kind of privilege. Like, if you're going to tell a werewolf story and it's going to star somebody who's a celebrity, you'd better have something to say, because otherwise you're just telling a story with more privileged characters than you need to have. What are the specific advantages that you have as a werewolf if you're really rich? Okay, let's explore that. Well, that just becomes a setting for the paparazzi characters to invade, and then it turns into a shoot 'em up, basically. So I end up feeling sort of, I was with you that I was more interested at the beginning than I was at the ending, and by the ending, I'm just sort of feeling like, right, don't know why the werewolf had to be famous. You could easily tell that story,
Well,
in a more interesting way.
yeah, the whole hit and run thing, is also sort of kind of derivative of other werewolf films that I've seen that are better than this. The one thing in my head as I was going through this, and again, these are all thoughts I was popping up, because there's a doctor in this, and he's sort of like, they clearly know what's happened, because she's obviously quit acting, she's left this film set, and she's come home. Everyone thinks she's relapsed, and she's going into this center to be treated. And even the doctor she's with seems to know something's wrong, because he's saying, "Oh no, well, look, let's get through tonight and tomorrow night, your full moons, and then we'll get this sorted." And so I'm like, oh, so he seems to have knowledge of this. Like, so I was almost expecting like this has happened before. In fact, actually, this is kind of a glorified thing within certain celebrity circles. We're going to take you to a celebrity compound where you can run free with other celebrity werewolves. And the ending of this was going to be they break in and find it's not just her, it's a whole bunch of them, and they're all there. No, it's just it's so sort of, yeah.
Well, and different horror genres subgenres have different relationships to class, right?
Yeah.
So, like, the vampire started as a sort of, it had upper class sort of,
Well, it's Count Dracula,
aspects.
isn't it? Yeah.
Right. But, it's become this very extremely upper class kind of, Interview with a Vampire, this sort of like, living these elite lives of these, rich people preying on the poor, right? So it has the vampire story has these sort of like very class conscious as a subgenre. Typically, werewolves and even to a greater degree zombies are sort of the opposite, right? They're seen as a sort of like lower class or working class kind of subgenre of horror, where there's not a lot of glamour to the werewolf. Now, obviously, that's changed with Twilight. This reuses, the supermassive black hole, that this song apparently used in Twilight. So it's conscious of that, but there's no glamour to the werewolf. And as you say, like, one problem that I have with all of these stories is, how does the wider world not know about this, right?
Yeah.
And it's one thing for a story to basically say, well, this is the one where you find out. But I think if this is so common that, as you say, like, the doctor knows how to deal with it, right? It's common enough that this has happened. I mean, I guess we have to believe that werewolves are super rare and that, this is just the first celebrity. But it's very mixed in its messages. Like, I sort of, it comes back at the ending to her taking the photo of basically the suicide of Mazey Day, a werewolf celebrity. I like the sort of cynical paparazzi, taking a photo of somebody as they're killing themselves as the ending. but that doesn't need the werewolf aspect. Like,
No.
the werewolf aspect is incidental to that. That just provided the action prior to that moment and lessens and cheapens that moment. It just makes me think, how do we not know about werewolves in this universe?
Well, yeah, and this is, like I say, it's as you say, the werewolf as a monster within the pantheon of monsters, is interesting because like there's clear sort of like delineations for others. So you say sort of like vampires is all about sort of the aristocracy. I'd even say sort of like you said like zombies, but even like Frankenstein's monster that created is very much I think about sort of like working class and sort of like the labor class that created people, and you get all the others. But the werewolf is an interesting one because you're not the monster all the time. It becomes about it's more of a psychological thing. So this thing about obviously being a lunatic is obviously from this idea of this now heavily obviously debunked idea of being trapped into the lunar cycle of crazy, that affecting people. Oh, it's a full moon, the crazies are out, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So the werewolf often gets sort of like more oddly enough, it's an odd one because the vampire, although male, in Dracula, is given a more feminine energy. And I'm going to tread on some dangerous territory here, so I'm going to be careful, but gets often given a feminine energy. Like it's more about sort of like passion and the sexiness, and it's that sort of like it leans into like the romance, and that's where you get things like even there's some stuff like that in Interview with the Vampire. See, within Dracula, it's the whole point of Dracula, that sort of like affection. And if you watch Bram Stoker's Dracula, the Francis Ford Coppola version, it's heavily in that. Think of Twilight, think of True Blood. Love and those things. It's heavily entwined with vampires.
Now, I do want to just briefly note that is all like a little bit of revisionism because
Yeah.
while the original Bram Stoker's Dracula has like the harem aspect, it doesn't have like he's ugly. He's described in these very werewolf-like ways.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, and you look at like Nosferatu, the classic film, and that's much more in line with the presentation of vampires at the time. But you're right; it's taken on this kind of very aristocratic bent.
Yeah, but like, I literally watched the Frank Langella one yesterday, sort of like, and it's very sort of like alluring and romantic and gothic, and it's all very sort of like But the werewolf is very sort of like because it's big and it's hairy and it's the alpha wolf and all this other stuff. It has a male energy, which I find unusual because, and this is, I'm going to be careful. There's obviously the women have a menstrual cycle, and which is sort of around 30 days or around 4 weeks or whatever. And it's sort of like it weirdly gets associated with that, but distance from that as well. So the werewolf becomes this sort of like male thing about this sort of cycle, but we don't really have, to an extent, so we have like miniature cycles because of the lunar thing. But werewolves have this very male energy. It's about a wolf. It's sort of like the Wolf Man was the first version of this. Wolfman of London, or the Wolfman, the Universal Monster. Even think like American Werewolf in London is obviously about to David Kessler in coming to England, all this other stuff. Like it's often a male protagonist. The Howling was one of the first ones to really introduce a female element into the werewolf lore. And so this one then introduces a female, a woman that's going to become a werewolf. And she's a celebrity, she's a starlet, she's an attractive actress. And like you say, all of that, she'll be like, oh, we're going to do something different with the werewolf. And we're going to try and sort of like, we're going to subvert this sort of male energy of the werewolf and do something different. And they don't. And I was really like, oh, this is where it is. This is where it's going to turn. There's going to be a whole thing at the end about it or something like, it's going to be she's going to be like an intelligent werewolf, or there's going to be something there. It's not about the animalistic thing. It's going to be something else. No, it really, it keeps giving idea. It starts with things and then does it. Okay, it wanders off.
Yeah, and we've seen that a lot with some of these more recent episodes where they sort of like shift in, even in season 5, right? With the celebrity one there, sort of shift into a different story, almost a different genre by the end. And again, like I like American Horror Story overall, but it's not consistently a great show by any means. It's very much comes in at that sort of like 5 to 6 kind of like meh seasons and like fine seasons, but an American Horror Story is sort of the same thing where there are a few good episodes, really good episodes, but mostly it's sort of like, well, that was a story about what if a werewolf was a celebrity and paparazzi found out. Okay, like that was entertaining enough, but really that's all it's about. It's just, hey, what if a werewolf were a celebrity
Yeah,
and paparazzi were trying to take photos of her?
but the
Okay,
motive, yeah,
but you're right. It has nothing to say about gender. It has nothing to
no.
say about the role of paparazzi, and I mean,
Well,
there's nothing
yeah,
new here.
no, nothing. I mean, this is the thing where I was like, okay, if you want to do this story, you need to be like, say, pick a lane, and or really go for it and tell two parallel stories that are going to clash at the end. And it's just it's called Mazey Day because she is the star that's being hunted down. And you just get several scenes of her that sort of set up the fact she's going to become a werewolf. There's been this hit and run. Now she's gone missing, right? That's it. But have it run parallel with, because one of the other things as well at the beginning, there's a scene of the paparazzis outside a club, and some of the paparazzis taunt a couple of celebrities or whoever it is that are coming out of this club, and someone refers to them as a bunch of pack animals. And I was like, oh, there we go. Right, we're gonna get some sort of thing here about how this is going to be a theme in this. No, it's just he thinks it's a good phrase to use to highlight something, but it doesn't do anything. But yeah, I was really sort of like, this should be about two women being trapped in situations, and having to sort of like maybe they're having to force to make decisions that result in the sort of this clash. I don't know, but
yeah, and you bring up an excellent point, which is that there are these sort of thematic elements that I can imagine, on a message board, somebody brings up how brilliant it is or whatever. That both the celebrity and the paparazzo are women. Okay. I mean, you mentioned the menstrual cycle thing. Okay. Again, but nothing's done with this. There's the whole idea of the paparazzo as predator, right? Which would tie great into the werewolf story, except again, you mentioned with the pack animals, that's kind of implicit, but it doesn't do anything with that.
No.
And I don't want to, especially this early in an episode, say, well, what if it did something different? I'd be much more interested in a story about a paparazzo who was themselves a werewolf and were, a predator by day, taking photos of celebrities, and a predator by night, or on the full moon, literally murdering people. And the idea that they're both different types of predators and, juxtaposing that kind of imagery, that would at least be something interesting and good. This is not doing that.
No. I mean, you're right. It's not. There's nothing tying this in. I mean, you're right. It's a bit early. The thing is, you say it's a bit early for us to be talking about what it should do or what we do differently. But the fact of the matter is, there's so little to talk about within this episode. Like it just happens. It happens. Even the ending, like the transformation, I would say the werewolf transformation is good. It's solid. I mean, it's not groundbreaking. It's not anything, I'm not going to go, it's a Rick Baker special kind of thing. It's nothing that's going to blow the mind, but it's good. It's solid. But it sort of gets into this thing at the end then, when you do have, she's transforming, and there's basically there's four paparazzi in the room. All right, she's chained to a bed, and they're trying to let her free, and there's four paparazzi in the room. Yeah, she starts transforming into a wolf. And she goes the full American werewolf. We have like the extending snout, and we see the hands and all this other stuff, right? It's all CG and it looks fine, right? Two of them go nuts to this, we're out, and do a runner. Two are then like, oh, we're gonna get a few more, get a few more. And it's like this thing of like just bad decisions where you're going like, no. I'll tell you how how humans react in these situations. We go into fight or flight and we run. I'll give you a quick story. Last night, right? Just say this: a large-ish spider ran across our bedroom floor just before we went to bed, and I mean, it wasn't small; it was a big spider. It's getting to that time of year. Me and Alex were my wife were sat on the bed with a Hoover with a long nozzle, trying to encourage it to come out so we could capture it. As a spider, right? Someone starts turning into a wolf, I'm gone. Like, I'm done. Like, that's me going, yeah, I'm out. Thank you. You know, like this whole thing of like, oh no, but my paparazzi, I've got to get the shot, is so silly. It's so ridiculous that like it would work in a sort of like B movie comedy horror. You know, you could do it in sort of like something like that, but not in this. Like, it just doesn't. If you're trying to go for, I don't know, it just feels so it's so rote that it was just I was rolling my eyes at that point.
Yeah, and I think you're right about the B movie horror thing, right? Like, you could kind of forgive it in that. And I think in that might be another reason why I thought of American Horror Story and or stories, is because there are a lot of characters in there who make decisions that you think, well, this isn't really how that would play out, right?
No,
This
well,
isn't,
Tales from the Crypt was the same, so
yeah, but I mean, and you sort of say like, well, it's fine because it's sort of like a B, movie trope kind of thing. But here, some of it is the direction, some of it is the timing, but there really is, you say fight or flight. Well, not everybody has to flee. These are, I'm quite shocked by their willingness to go into that compound. That might happen occasionally, but they seem to really brush it off. They're not really concerned about a guard with a shotgun or something like that. And then they're in the room as she's transforming, and they stay way too long. It's perfectly obvious they're going to be killed. But they don't. They also have her chain. They have tools right there. Tie her back up. Knock her unconscious. Something like that. I mean, certainly your rules of I'm just going to photograph go out the door when somebody is a werewolf in the room with you. The timing doesn't feel right. Somebody could go into the fight mode, but they don't. I suppose we're supposed to think that just taking photos is supposed to be the fight mode because it's predatory, except again the show doesn't establish that.
Then show that or something. It's a bit like because you're following like the Zazie Beetz, and she sort of tracks down this Mazey Day to this compound, and then she sort of the other thing is other people know she's there because Mazey Day's bodyguard sees Bo, the Zazie Beetz character, comes and punctures her tires. So she knows, she's recognized as a paparazzi and stuff, right? She's been asking around, so they puncture her tires, and then so her friend turns up on his motorbike, and then in order to get a full cast for this end scene, two of his other paparazzi mates have had to put a tracker on his motorbike. And I'm like, so the moment they turned up and they were like, "Oh, you got a tracker under your fuel tank," I was like, "Oh, you two are dead. Like, you are literally here because these two have got to be in the final scene." But you want someone to die. These are literally your Star Trek red shirts. You're broadcasting it. You're not even clever enough to try and give us anything that's a little bit savvy. But anyway,
you're absolutely right.
And so so that was eye rolling. But again, like, if you were leaning into the B movie over the toppy kind of, if you were going to do a parody, or not parody, but like a satire of that kind of genre, then go for it, and you can get away with it. But yeah, they end up in a diner. They've got the rote trope of the lazy sheriff, the lazy deputy, and then they eventually get chased down and people get killed by the werewolf, and then she's shot and she transforms back. And I've just thought of something actually, but it's basically sort of like she gets shot, and she says like, "Kill me, kill me." Shoot me is what she says. Shoot me. And again, they're like, aren't we clever? Because it's a photo shoot.
Yes, I know.
And I'm like, right. Oh. And Zazie Beetz, Bo takes the photograph, and it zooms out, and there's a gunshot. And that's the end. Have you ever seen, there's a film called Dog Soldiers, which is a really good werewolf film. So it's about a British army unit on training in the Scottish Highlands or the Scottish sort of woodland. And during an exercise, something goes wrong, and they see that they end up getting sort of chased down by werewolves, and they lose one of their guys, and they end up sort of. Then this woman comes along, and they end up getting holed up in this like house in the middle of nowhere in the sort of Scottish Highlands. And then the rest of the film's like a siege movie. They are under siege from these werewolves. So it's basically soldiers versus werewolves. And they get picked off one by one, and it's really good. I mean, it's low budget. It's Neil Marshall who did Doomsday and a few other films. The Descent, really good. Anyway, at the end of the film, at one point they use a camera flash to blind a werewolf, right?
Yeah.
And so they use it, and they're running at this werewolf, like click, 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 and the flash is going off, and you're. So anyway, at the end of the film, you end up with this one soldier who sort of like survives. He finds the camera. So over the end credits is him coming forward and trying to present these photos. And it's all this stuff in the news. And some are saying like, werewolves are real and all this other stuff. And then there's others going like, crazy soldier person, sort of like, soldier, PTSD causes hallucinations and kills his own troops. And it's basically sort of like the end credits. It's like, yeah, he went back to like civilization, presented this, and hardly anyone believed him. And so like it's a really cool ending of like you've watched them go through this. He's lost his squad, and yet the world still ridicules him and thinks he's a nutcase. It's kind of like this bittersweet ending. And this should sort of be the same, where she's like, I got the photo, and like no, but like no one will take it, or like they think she's crazy, or she ends up getting, she gets in sort of in trouble and sort of implicated in the murder of Mazey Day, or I don't know.
Right. Well, you mentioned that sort of South Park quote, and I think of good stories as inevitable, right? In that same sense, and what I preach as a creative writer is that, I try to. I mean, even when I'm writing a story and I know, not everything is literally inevitable, that, a character gets sick, for example. Well, that's kind of random. But, I think about what are the elements of this story that need to be there, right? For the fullest flowering of those themes.
The jigsaw pieces that need to be in place kind of thing.
Right, exactly. And so, there is a sense of inevitability that is just not here, right? And so this is but the other thing that I think of implications, and we often talk about implications, right? Like the smallest scene has a million implications, right? Teasing out those implications, letting them steer your story, making sure you get those implications right, and letting them steer your story is so much of what defines good writing. And with this in mind, this episode falls into this trap that we've talked about before, of where I am so interested in the denouement, right? I'm so interested in like what happens after the action, right? Where you have like, an alien invasion story, and you think this is a run-of-the-mill alien invasion story. Could have gone another way, could have gone another, but at the end of the day, like New York is destroyed. Washington, D.C. is destroyed.
Yeah.
What happens next is really interesting. And that's what we don't get to see because we got alien fisticuffs, Here is another example of that. And talking about Dog Soldiers is a perfect example. I haven't seen the film, but I love what you're saying.
High recommend. Very good film.
What happens after this episode is far more interesting. If this episode started 5 years later, following Bo as she, is herself hounded by the press, has to explain to boyfriends or girlfriends or whatever, this story. Do werewolves exist? I mean, there's photographic evidence now, the world has to react to that or not. And we could get some of the story told in flashback, but we'd have to, even just the idea that the existence of werewolves is revealed to the world, and, in the salacious, scandal thing. If that's the starting point, that we finally found out werewolves are real because of, paparazzi culture, that's a great setup for an episode or even a whole series. I want to see that story. I don't want to see the run-of-the-mill flashbacks leading up to that.
No, I agree. I mean, there should be this is one of these things where it should be a mystery. And as you're describing that, there are several episodes of, you've mentioned like American Horror Story and that sort of thing. There was another show called Masters of Horror, where they did a bunch of sort of like, high profile sort of horror associated directors got to do a one-off, and they could do the story and sort of stuff. John Carpenter, Stuart Gordon, Guillermo del Toro, there's a few others. And I really like the John Carpenter one. It's called Cigarette Burns. And it's about a film that if you watch the film, it drives you mad. All right. And so there's this thing of like, there was this one presentation of the film in 1946, say. And since then it's disappeared. But recently there's been this report. Yeah, there's this report, and apparently there's an angel or something in this thing, and this guy, it's about a collector tracking it down. But like you say, you get the sort of like the information about how bad this film is and the aftermath of this film and what's happened and stuff to all these people keep sort of coming in as information. It's like a detective story, and it's actually really good. And then he finally gets a copy. And by the time you get to the end of it, where he's got this copy, and you're like, he's going to watch this, but we know if this gone on. You're like, oh my God, like you feel really tense. Like we're now going to be presented with this thing. You as the viewer never get to see it because it's never as bad as what your imagination plays out. But the end of the episode is quite graphic and all this other stuff. Like some people watch the film and it drives them crazy. But the point is, like you say, if you just had it as sort of like a run of the mill where there was like that first screening of the film where we've done this and this happened, like you'd be like, oh, okay, all right, well, that's not great. But you need that mystery and the context and everything else to be building up. And like you say, I feel like I've just watched the first part of a bigger story. We've watched like act one of a much more interesting story. And it sort of ends, and I'm just like, where's the detective? Where's the sort of like the press following up on this about how Zazie Beetz' character went missing, or like, people stepped in and this compound was burnt down, or like this diner or something. Like there needs to be something more. It just feels very flat when you get to the end.
No, I agree with that. And, I mean, even just there's this massacre at this rural diner, that's associated. I mean, all of this would be a sort of fascinating mystery, how
families were paid off, and, and the whole town was advised to hush this up and that sort of thing.
Right. And then how does the world react to werewolves being proved by bunch of paparazzi as opposed to, legitimate press, right? And how but then that becomes a whole very story.
Yeah, does she get
a very different story?
Yeah, well, does she actually because that's the thing, you can either have it as she releases the information, and in this world of conspiracy theories in which we exist, people either believe it or they don't. And there's wild theories around it, or someone intervenes and she doesn't get to release it, and then it gets leaked a different way or something, or that's it. Like, it's about tracking that evidence down. Like,
well, and let's be clear, she's going to be prosecuted, right?
Yes, 100%. Yeah.
I mean, this is so silly. But you mentioned this episode.
That's a really good point. Sorry, because she is literally the reason those people died in the diner, because she's the one that unchained her.
Well, but also there's the photos aren't destroyed. The police are going to find these photos of the werewolves on the other cameras, and it's going to be crystal clear that they broke and entered into this compound, right?
Yeah.
That resulted in, a whole series of deaths, including the death of a cop, right? This is not going to go over well. She's a lone survivor. Everybody's going to doubt the story, right? The final girl, right? But you mentioned like that this should have some sense of mystery. The mystery is really what's going on with Mazey Day.
Yeah.
And we have this flashback to hitting somebody in a road in the Czech Republic. And, so that's sort of the mystery. The solution to that mystery is it was a dog who bit me, and, or a werewolf who bit me. And especially for a show that's a sci-fi show that's kind of breaking its own rules to do a supernatural episode, I'm fine with that. Right. It does a Red Mirror production, like, oh, okay, fine. I'm good with all that. I can buy that. Change up the formula. Okay, fine. But it's not satisfying how it's done. And if the mystery is, what's the deal with Mazey Day? And the answer is, well, she's a werewolf. Ha ha. That's all we've got. Like, it's so meta that, like, it's meta in the most unsatisfying way, that unless you know that the real mystery is, are we going to do a supernatural thing, right? Aha, it's a supernatural answer. That's the real mystery. That's the real rug pull here. And that only works if you know this is a sci-fi show that's not supposed to do that. But then it's not satisfying. It doesn't, like, that's the whole episode. It's kind of like,
well, it's almost like, yeah.
We broke our own rules. Look what we did. You didn't
But-
think we'd do it.
But this is the thing, like, say, if you're going to do a rug pull like that, have a twist. Like, the twist itself cannot be, we've done a disappointing supernatural episode instead. Like, then you've pissed off the people that like it because it's a sci-fi show. The horror fans that are probably there as well, like myself, are going to go, all right, you're doing a werewolf episode, but it's not a good werewolf episode, so I'm not hugely impressed. I don't know. It just feels like, like it sort of misfires on every. Like I say, it's this thing of like, it looks good. The cast are mostly fine. But it's so sort of like mundane in everything that it does, that it sort of, it just sort of happens, and I just sort of shrug my shoulders and go, okay, well, that was an episode that I will never go back to. It's sort of.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's better than that. I mean, I think it's, it's fine, sort of meh, but I mean, it's not bad. There's nothing here that's bad. It just doesn't explore its themes. It doesn't go anywhere. It's an entertaining 40 some minutes, right? If this is
I wasn't that far. I was kind of bored. That's the problem. I was kind of bored by it because there's no mystery for me to go. I mean, there's nothing there for me to go, well, this is what it's about. I'm kind of curious of what's going to happen. Like, it just felt like kind of like, all right, so what is it? This thing around what's happening to Mazey Day, like the stakes are so low.
Yeah, you don't care.
I don't care. Like,
right.
It's not.
I don't care either.
It's not like the character of Bo is like, I've got to get this photo for whatever reason. Like, this could be a career. I could retire.
Pay her rent.
Yeah, she's like, I've got to pay my rent. Like, it's not like
but that's such a by the books kind of motivation for a character to want money. And then there's the shift from like being super cheap, to, well, we'll give $30,000 for this photo. The same person is going to give 30. I mean, it's such a switch. Yeah. I mean, everything is kind of.
It should feel like this. If you're going to do that, have it like be one last job. Like, she's really still torn up about the events of the guy, but she's like, look, all right, I can work. This is my last one. I've got to get enough money to help me get on the ladder elsewhere. I'm doing this to get out of it.
I sort of took it that way. I mean, she sort of isn't taking photos anymore after the suicide, and she's having a drink. She's troubled by this, but she's pulled back to make that rent. I sort of did take it that way, but again, there's no real character there.
No,
right? There's no characterization to any of them. Bo is the closest to a character here. It just seems like you're moving chess pieces about, you're moving these pawns around in in an episode that is, I mean, it is not poorly written. It's shot well. I mean, there's the editing, the timing issue, around the transformation and stuff. I mean, there's nothing exceptional, but there's nothing like kind of.
You say it's not
grossly
poorly
incompetent.
No, you say it's not poorly written. I would say it's not badly written, but it's one of those where I just sort of go, like you say, what you're saying. Well, that's how I read it. This was sort of one. Yeah, but like
that's
It needs to be like
dramatize it,
like or tell don't tell. Was it show don't tell? All right, show me then beyond this scene that of her going, I'm back, back in it, or just make it a bit more dramatic where she's struggling with not just have him turn up at the coffee shop and say this stuff, actually have her refuse it, then go, and then come back and be like, I'm ready. I'm not surviving as a. It's tropey. I'm not good at what I do. Quit the job. Go do this final thing so I can. I've got another way out. I'm good at what I do. I can find a way out of this. I don't know. It just feels like so mundane and so sort of like, and then this, and then she's offered a job, and then this happens, and then this does this, and it's does that. Like it never feels like, because of how difficult how she is struggling, she's trapped in a situation where this is the only way out for her.
Right.
And that's what it should feel like. Like going over the wall into that compound should be a barrier for her, and it sort of is, because she's even saying to them, like, I can't believe we're crawling, we're crawling in dirt. Like it's like, all right, I know, I get it's a metaphor, like, you know,
Yeah.
but like crossing that wall should be like a real line for her, where she's like, I've never really gone this far before.
And I kind of feel that. I mean, you know,
Yeah,
I feel that a little bit, but like you said, it's all just kind of like implied.
Yeah.
And you know, you can do that and have it be good, but this isn't really doing that and in a good way. But you know, you're pointing out the central flaw, which is really there aren't many characters here, right?
No.
I mean, there aren't real characters. They're not fleshed out. Even Mazey Day, you know, I mean, what kind of actress is she? Is she, you know, a serious actress? Is she trying to be a serious actress before she quits to?
Is she a pre? Is she a bit? Yeah. Is she?
Which does she have a history of being a prima donna?
Exactly. That's the sort of thing. Like, has she got a history of, you know, is this her drug abuse a real sort of thing? Has it cost her jobs in the past? Blah blah blah. Like, you know,
what is the drug abuse about? Like, that's just there is the explanation for what the press thinks she's doing. You know, having left the set and being at this compound. Okay, but how does drug abuse tie into the themes of being a werewolf or of, you know, being a paparazzi? None of those themes tie together. None of them are really explored. And I think it's sort of like, this is a strong first draft. This is a very strong first draft for an episode, but it hasn't found its heart yet. You know, and if this were in a creative writing class, I'd say, you know, right, what is the heart of the story? What is this about? I know what the plot is. It's not the most exceptional plot in the world. It's not a bad plot, but what is it about? What is it saying? What, you know, what is the heart of the story here? And there really is no heart. It's just a plot.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's just a plot. You're right. Anyway.
Yeah.
I think we should leave
it. Just
there.
happens.
Yeah, exactly. It just sort of happens. And everyone sort of shrugs, takes photos, and leaves them. It's holiday snaps rather than paparazzi. Anyway, okay, we've run to time there. So, any final thoughts then on Mazey Day?
No. We've said too much already.
Yeah, more than it warrants. Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you know, if you think we're wrong or right about Mazey Day, or you got thoughts, let us know. Reach out on social media. On X, it's at PodTimeSpace. We're on there talking about different bits and pieces. Or find us under all other social media as at 20th Century Geek under the whole media banner. And if you really like us, leave a review. Let us know what you think of the whole show. We're getting close to the end of our Black Mirror saga. How has it gone? If you think we've been fair to the show, or do you think we've been too mean or too light? I don't know. Let us know in a review. And if you really like what we're doing, obviously go and check out our Patreon, where there's a whole bunch of other bonus material on there. We've done extra episodes from some of the films on the main feed, as well as trekking through the Twilight Zone. And we're going through each episode, much as we're doing with Black Mirror. We're going through each episode and making a statement about it. Anyway, for now, Julian, thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott.
Another good chat. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. And we shall see you on the next episode.
There's something very important I forgot to tell you.
What?
Don't cross the streams.